The dining room of the Aldercroft estate went quiet when Vivienne Aldercroft set down her wine glass. 40 guests turned. Bennett Cross stood near the back wall in a sport coat he had borrowed from the project site manager, the shoulders slightly too broad, the lapels a season behind. Vivienne's voice carried the way old money always carries, not loud, but inescapable. "My daughter deserves a man who can afford to take her somewhere nicer than a job site, Mr. Cross. You should know your place before you embarrass yourself further." Marin stood between them, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. Bennett did not answer. He did not look away from Vivienne, but he did not answer her either. In the inside pocket of his jacket, folded in thirds, was a letter from a Portland attorney named Gerald Fitch that he had been carrying for 11 days without opening. Vivienne smiled at the room. She did not know. She had just said that to the man who held the controlling interest in everything she was standing on. September came to Savannah the way it always did. Slow, damp. The azaleas finished and the Spanish moss thickened and the whole city settled into its particular version of patience. Bennett signed the lease on a rental house on Jones Street on a Thursday, paid 3 months in advance, cash equivalent, drawn on a Portland account that no one in Savannah would think to look up. The house had 2 bedrooms, a porch with a ceiling fan that clicked on every third rotation, and a fig tree in the side yard that dropped fruit onto the brick path with a sound like a small, private argument. Willa picked her room without hesitation. She went straight to the one with the window seat, stood on it in her sneakers, looked at the fig tree, and declared it hers. Bennett took the other room. He did not unpack his second bag for 6 days. The act of unpacking felt like a decision he had not yet made. On the 4th morning, Willa found a loose board on the porch steps. She showed him the way 7-year-olds show things, by standing on it repeatedly until it made the loudest possible sound. Bennett knelt, pressed the board, looked underneath, said the nail had worked itself out, said he would fix it. He did not fix it that day. He did not fix it that week. The board stayed loose because some things in a new city needed to be exactly as impermanent as you felt. The Aldercroft Inn sat 4 blocks south on Bull Street, a federal-style building from 1851. With a wrought iron fence and a reputation the family had been trading on for longer than the building deserved. It was the flagship property of Aldercroft Hospitality, founded by Vivienne's grandfather, currently operated by her daughter Maureen, who had spent the last 6 years trying to modernize a company that treated tradition as a substitute for maintenance. Bennett walked the property with the outgoing project lead on a Monday morning. The man walked fast and talked faster, pointing at the failing plasterwork on the 3rd-floor corridor, the kitchen ventilation system that had been documented as a fire hazard in 2021 and subsequently documented again in 2022 and not addressed in either year, and a load-bearing wall on the east side that someone had partially removed in 1994 to open up a banquet space and then quietly forgotten about. Bennett listened. He had read the structural assessment twice on the flight down from Portland. He arrived at the Tuesday kickoff in dark canvas pants and the kind of work boots that had been resoled once already. Marin Aldercroft walked in 2 minutes past the hour, alone, a slim notebook under one arm, her hair pulled back the way a person pulls their hair back when they intend to work and not to be looked at. She was 38. She introduced herself to the room, and then she introduced the room to Bennett, which was the kind of small courtesy Vivienne would never have thought to extend. Bennett opened the structural drawings on the folding table they had set up in what had once been the hotel's reading room. He read them the way he read everything. Not left to right, but in relationships, connection to connection, load path to load path. He found the east wall on sheet 4 and placed his finger on the header above the removed section and said, without preamble, "This is carrying more than it was designed to carry. We can't touch anything on this floor until we address it." Marin looked at the sheet, then she looked at him. The look lasted a half-second longer than a professional look needed to last. Behind him, the door to the hallway swung open an inch. Willa had been sitting in the lobby with a chapter book and had, apparently, decided the chapter book was finished. She peered through the gap, 7 years old, a loose braid, one sock higher than the other. Marin saw her first. She smiled. Not a performed smile, but a real one, fast and unguarded. Bennett saw the smile. He stepped sideways without making a production of it and said, "Willa, lobby. I'll be there in 10. Willa withdrew. Bennett pulled the door closed. He did not look at Marin again until the meeting ended. That evening, on the kitchen table of the Jones Street house, he opened an envelope he had been carrying since Portland. Inside was a single photograph. Claire, summer of 2014, standing on the front steps of the Aldercroft Inn in a green linen dress, squinting into the sun, the wrought iron fence behind her. She was 31 in the photograph. She would have been 41 now. He turned the photograph face down. Willa came in from the yard with dirt on her knees and a fig in each hand. She held one out to him. "Is this where we're staying, Daddy?" He looked at the back of the photograph for a moment. "This is where we needed to be," he said. She accepted this. She ate her fig. She asked if they could get a dog. 3 weeks into the demolition phase, Bennett spread the contractor bids across the kitchen table on a Sunday night and stayed with them until 2 in the morning. By Tuesday he had worked through the numbers twice, once roughly and once precisely, and he had written the result on a single sheet of paper in his own hand. The millwork restoration package was running 42% above comparable market rates. The vendor was Heritage Craft Interiors, LLC, registered in Georgia. The principal of Heritage Craft Interiors was a man named Douglas Aldercroft, Vivian's younger brother, who had been quietly receiving preferential contracts from Aldercroft Hospitality Properties for 9 years. A different contractor would have looked at the number, looked at the budget envelope, decided it was inside the margin, and moved on. The job would have gotten done. The overcharge would have been absorbed. No one would have said anything, because no one had said anything for 9 years. Bennett did not move on. He left a single annotated page on Marin's desk at the site office at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning, before she arrived. The annotation included rate comparisons across 6 regional preservation projects, a note on the cumulative cost over the contract term, and a 1-sentence reference to the Georgia business law provision on related party transactions in closely held companies. He signed it with his initials only, BC. Marin read it at 7:52. She read it again at 8:04. She did not call Douglas. She did not call Vivian. She did not walk down to the site trailer and ask the contractor why he had put a legal citation at the bottom of a bid analysis. She sat at her desk for a while, watching the light come through the window onto Bull Street. Then she opened her email and sent a quiet message to the company's outside accountant, requesting an independent review of the millwork contract and a rebid under standard arm's-length process. The rebid came in 23% lower. The new contract was issued the following week. Douglas Aldercroft called Vivian on a Thursday afternoon. Vivian listened. She did not call Marin. She opened her laptop and typed the name into the search bar, Bennett Cross, contractor. The results were thin: a Portland builder's license, an LLC registered in Oregon, a photograph from a nonprofit fundraiser 3 years old, in which Bennett stood beside a woman whose face was turned towards someone off camera. Vivian closed the laptop. She called her assistant. She said quietly that she wanted to know everything about the project lead on the Aldercroft Inn restoration. She said to do it without making noise. That same Thursday, Marin passed Bennett on the back staircase of the inn. He was carrying a water level. She was carrying a binder. Neither of them stopped moving. She said only, "The millwork review came back cleaner." He said only, "Good." Neither of them looked back. But Marin stopped at the top of the stairs and stood there for a moment she did not account for. She had spent her entire professional life inside Aldercroft Hospitality, which meant she had spent it watching Douglas collect fees. No one was supposed to notice, and watching Vivian make decisions that were never up for discussion, and watching the people around her decide that pointing at any of it was more trouble than it was worth. She had been told she was reading too much into things. She had been told that family companies worked differently. She had been told to focus on what she could control, and here was a man with a water level who had been on the property for 3 weeks and had written a 7-line annotation that said, in precise and unremarkable language, exactly what she had been seeing for years. She did not know anything about him yet. She did not know what had brought him from Portland to Savannah, or what he looked like when he was not working, or why his daughter had appeared in the doorway of a project meeting with one sock higher than the other and a chapter book tucked under her arm. She knew the annotation. The annotation was correct, and for the first time in a long time, she did not feel like she was the only one in the room who could read the numbers. The Saturday at the end of September was the kind of Savannah morning that makes October feel like a mercy. Hot still, but the light had changed. Lower and more deliberate, the way light gets when summer is finally done arguing. The fig tree in the side yard on Jones Street had given everything it had. Bennett brought Willa to the inn because the demo crew had the day off, and she had asked 3 times, and on the 3rd time had deployed the particular expression she had inherited from Claire, which was not a pout exactly but a stillness so complete it was harder to refuse than any amount of noise. He let her explore the inn's rear courtyard while he sat on the 2nd-floor balcony with a clipboard and a list of punch items on the window casings that were going to require more attention than the original scope had allowed for. Marin came through the courtyard gate at 10 in the morning. She came most Saturdays, not because she needed to check on the project, but because the courtyard was the one part of Aldercroft property that had never fully belonged to Vivienne's idea of what the place should be. Someone had planted rosemary along the south wall decades ago, and it had never been removed. Vivienne found it informal. Marin found it honest. Willa was crouched by the rosemary examining something in the soil. Marin sat down on the low brick wall beside her and asked what she had found. Willa said she thought it was a roly-poly, but it had too many legs. Marin looked. She said it might be a garden centipede. Willa considered this. She said that was a worse name. Marin laughed, one short real sound. It was the first time she had laughed in that courtyard and she could not remember how long. After a moment, Willa said without looking up, "My mom's in heaven. Dad says she loved old buildings. He says that's why she was happy." Marin did not respond right away. She looked at the rosemary. "I had someone once," she said, "who felt that way about this building specifically. She used to walk through the whole inn on Sunday mornings before it opened, and she said it was the only time she could hear what it was actually supposed to be. She taught me how to read a profit and loss statement when I was 19. She said the numbers were just the building talking." Willa looked up. What was her name? "Claire," Marin said. Willa turned the name over once, quietly, the way children do. Then she went back to the centipede. On the 2nd-floor balcony, the window above the courtyard was open for the cross breeze. Bennett had heard every word. He did not move for a long time. The clipboard rested on the railing. His hand rested on the clipboard. His daughter was in the courtyard, below talking to a woman he had known for 3 weeks, and that woman had just said his wife's name, and there was a version of the world in which this was a coincidence, and he was already certain it was not. He set the clipboard down with the kind of care you use when you are not sure of your hands. He came down a staircase 10 minutes later and walked into the courtyard in his socks because he had left his boots at the balcony door out of habit. Willa ran to him immediately with an update on the centipede situation. He kept his eyes on her until she was done. Then he looked at Marin. She stood and looked back at him. Something in the way she was standing had changed. "She came through this property once," Marin said. "Years ago. She was consulting for a hospitality group out of Portland. My mother would not extend the contract because she said the recommendations were too aggressive." A pause. "I thought she was right at the time." "I know," Bennett said. Marin looked at him. "I know because she told me," he said. "She came home from Savannah in October, and she sat at the kitchen table for 2 days going over the financials she had seen, and she said someone in that building understood what it needed. She said it was the woman who did not yet have the authority to fix it." Marin was very still. He did not say anything else. Neither did she. Willa's attention had moved on to a moth on the south wall, and the courtyard was quiet except for the sound of Bull Street foot traffic and the rosemary moving in a very small wind. The unnamed thing between them was now something they were both holding. Vivienne returned from Atlanta on the 8th of October, in the mood she always returned from Atlanta in, which was the mood of a woman who had spent 3 days being told things she had not wanted to hear. She was at her office on Abercorn Street by 5:30. She walked past Marin's door without acknowledging it. The Aldercroft Foundation autumn dinner was set for the 22nd. Black tie, 120 guests, the alderman, the Historic Preservation Board, the head of the Savannah College of Art and Design, and 4 donors who had drifted over the past 2 years and needed to be reminded why they had been donors in the first place. On the 12th, Vivienne's longtime personal assistant, a woman named Frances who had been with the family for 18 years, appeared in Marin's office doorway with a small envelope and set it on the desk without speaking. Frances never spoke when she delivered envelopes from Vivienne. Marin opened it. It was a paragraph and a half, handwritten on Aldercroft stationery. At the dinner, Vivienne wrote she would be announcing Marianne's engagement to a man named Christopher Whitfield, son of the Whitfield banking family, whose relationship with the Aldercroft family went back 3 generations, and whose own family had made it quietly clear that a formal alliance would be mutually beneficial in the current environment. The announcement would be tasteful. Frances would handle the press list. Marin would understand that this was not a request. Marin had not spoken to Christopher Whitfield in 7 years. The last time she had, he had spent 45 minutes at a dinner party discussing the resale value of his boat and had not once asked her a question. She walked down the hall to Vivienne's office. Vivienne was at her desk. Marin closed the door and did not sit. "You did not ask me. I did not need to. I'm 40 years old, which is exactly why the timing works. The Whitfields are patient people, Marin. Christopher is suitable. His family understands how we operate. You have spent your entire career building something that needs a different kind of protection now, and this is how that works." Marin looked at her for a long moment. Then she left. She did not go back to her office. She drove east through the historic district with both windows down and the radio off. She drove, past the inn, past the river, past the block where she had grown up watching Vivienne make decisions that became facts simply by being decided. She had accommodated those decisions for so long that she had stopped being able to feel the weight of them individually. They had become the atmosphere. You did not notice the atmosphere. You just breathed it. She ended up at the inn's rear courtyard at 8:20 in the evening, sitting on the low brick wall with her shoes off and her phone face down beside her. Bennett came around the side gate at 8:40. He had no particular reason to be there, except that he had been walking back from a hardware run, and the gate had been open, and something in the way the evening sat made him go through it instead of past it. He saw her on the wall. He came across the courtyard quietly and sat down on the far end of the same wall with enough distance to make clear it was her choice how the next few minutes went. He did not ask what had happened. He set a water bottle on the brick beside her. She picked it up, drank, put it back. The courtyard was lit by a single sconce near the back door and the ambient glow of the street beyond the gate. Somewhere in the garden behind the adjacent property, something was moving through dry leaves. 20 minutes passed. When Marin stood to leave, she put her hand briefly on his shoulder. "Just once. The way you touch a railing you know will hold." Then she walked to her car. Bennett sat on the wall alone until the sconce timer clicked off and the courtyard went dark. The 22nd came on a night, cool enough to make the black-tie crowd grateful for the formality. The Aldercroft dining room, which Vivienne had never once allowed to look like anything other than what it had always been, was as close to perfect as a room can get when perfection has become its only mode. White linens, candles in hurricane glass, a string trio in the corner, and 120 people who had learned long ago that being invited to an Aldercroft dinner was less an honor than an instruction. Bennett was there because the lighting rig for the renovated entrance hall had been commissioned as part of the restoration scope, and the lead electrician had called in sick at 4 in the afternoon, and the system needed someone who could sit on the dimmer panel through the evening. He wore a charcoal blazer that belonged to one of the senior carpenters and fit him well enough that only someone looking for the difference would have found it. In the inside pocket, folded and still sealed, was the letter from Gerald Fitch that he had been carrying for 23 days. He had still not opened it. Marin saw him from across the room at 8. She crossed to where he stood near the side corridor, stopped, looked at the panel he was monitoring, and said, without greeting him, "Thank you for the other night," he said. "Of course," she said. "She's announcing it tonight," he said. "I know." They stood together for another moment, close enough to talk quietly, far enough that no one watching would have been certain what they were. Across the room, Vivienne watched them from beside the drinks table with the stillness of a woman who has already decided. Christopher Whitfield approached Marin from the bar at 8:17, smiling the smile of a man who has been briefed on what is about to happen. Marin took one small step back. Christopher's smile held, but 3 people near the string trio saw the step. Vivienne saw it. Vivienne set down her drink. She crossed to the side corridor where Bennett stood and spoke to him quietly, her back to the room. "I've spoken with Gerald Fitch," she said. This was not true, but she said it as though it were. "I know what you think you're holding. Whatever arrangement you believe you have with the property, it ends tonight. You'll finish the restoration through your site lead. You'll leave Savannah by the end of the week. You'll take the child and go back wherever you came from, and the Aldercroft family will wish you well." Bennett looked at her. "There's a number," she said. She named it. He said, "No." The word was very quiet. Vivienne had expected negotiation. She had expected anger, or at minimum a performance of wounded pride. The quiet was something she did not have a response for. She went back to the room. She lifted her glass. "Before we begin the evening," she said when the room had hushed, "I want to acknowledge something that has troubled me since our guests arrived." The room turned. "There is someone here tonight who has mistaken this family's hospitality for an invitation he was not given. Mr. Cross." She looked at him directly. "You are a contractor. A good one, I'm told, but a contractor. There is no version of this room in which you belong on the same side of the table as my daughter. I trust you know how to find the door." Marin did not move. 119 people did not move. Bennett looked at Vivienne for 3 seconds. Then he reached into the inside pocket of the borrowed blazer, took out the letter from Gerald Fitch, and set it on the panel beside him, still sealed. He looked at it for a moment. Then he walked out of the room through the side corridor, and the sound of the door closing behind him was barely audible over the string trio, which had not stopped playing. 3 days after the dinner, Gerald Fitch called Bennett's cell phone at 7 in the morning and said, without introduction, "She made a mistake last year. She made it in writing, and I am no longer comfortable with what I know and what I have not said." Fitch was 64. He had been outside counsel to Aldercroft Hospitality for 27 years. He had attended Claire's memorial service in Portland in 2021, and had stood near the back, where the family of the deceased ends and the professional obligation begins. Bennett had noticed him there but had not placed him until later. They met in a coffee shop on Liberty Street. Fitch set a folder on the table and bought them both a coffee, and did not make a speech about what he was doing or why. 3 years earlier, Vivienne had taken out a debt facility against the Aldercroft preferred shares to finance an acquisition that had subsequently failed. When the lender called the loan in the third quarter of 2022, Vivienne had been unable to cover it. The shares had been liquidated in a quiet transaction through an intermediary. The intermediary was a holding entity that traced, through 3 nominee companies registered across 2 states and 1 offshore jurisdiction, to an Oregon limited partnership called Brightwater Holdings, LLC. Brightwater Holdings was Bennett Cross. He had not sought it out. Claire had been tracking the Aldercroft financials for years. The way a person tracks the health of something they love from a distance they did not choose. When the margin call happened, she had already been gone for 8 months. The shares had moved through the intermediary before Bennett had fully understood what he was looking at. Gerald Fitch had been the one to explain it to him 2 years ago, in a phone call that had lasted an hour and 40 minutes. What Bennett held now, combined with a subsequent purchase in the secondary market, was 44% of the Aldercroft Hospitality voting common. Fitch slid a second folder across the table. The Aldercroft board had a meeting scheduled for the following Monday. Vivienne had placed one item on the agenda under new business, a resolution to restructure the company's operational authority by consolidating all executive functions in the office of the chairwoman effective immediately, removing Marin's title and signing authority pending a governance review. She had the votes. She had gone around the table quietly over the past 2 weeks, and she had the votes. The stated rationale, per the draft resolution Fitch set in front of Bennett, was that Marin's recent decisions, the millwork rebid, the departure from standard vendor relationships, certain behaviors at the foundation dinner, had demonstrated a pattern of judgment inconsistent with the family's long-term interests. Bennett read the draft resolution. He read it again. Fitch said, "I've been her counsel for 27 years. I've watched her use this company the way some people use a territory. I've advised her, and I've protected her, and I've done it because that is what I was retained to do." A pause. "Claire came to me in 2019. She asked me one question. She asked whether the board structure allowed a significant minority holder to force a special meeting. I told her yes. I told her the threshold was 30% of voting common. She said thank you, and she did not call me again." He looked at Bennett. "I don't believe in coincidence at my age." Bennett looked out the window at Liberty Street. The morning was gray and close, the way Savannah mornings get in late fall when the humidity still hasn't made up its mind. "If you walk into that room Monday," Fitch said, "you can stop it, but you have to be willing to be something other than a contractor." Bennett thought of Claire. He thought of Willa asleep in the Jones Street house with her chapter book open on the pillow beside her. He thought of Marin in the courtyard with her shoes off and her hand resting on the brick. He thought of the way Marin had laughed when Willa said the centipede had too many legs, and how it had sounded like a person remembering something they had forgotten they knew. He nodded once. Fitch slid the second folder the rest of the way across the table. Monday morning, Bennett rode the elevator to the 8th floor of the Aldercroft building on Abercorn Street alone. He wore a charcoal suit he had brought from Portland and had not worn since Claire's memorial. His boots were replaced with dress shoes. The letter from Gerald Fitch, now open, sat in his inside breast pocket. The Aldercroft board convened at 9. 10 directors. Vivian at the head of the table in a gray suit that had the quality of armor. Marin sat 4 seats to her left, her hands flat on the table, her face composed in the way of a person who has been told something this morning they are still processing. Fitch sat at the far end, a folder open in front of him. Vivienne opened the meeting and moved immediately to new business. She read the resolution language without softening it. She said the company was at a critical point. She said the consolidation of authority was temporary and would be reviewed quarterly. She said no one in the room should mistake this for anything other than what it was. Stewardship. The door opened. Bennett walked in. He walked directly to the empty chair at the end of the table opposite Vivienne and sat down. The room was very quiet. Vivienne said, with the patience of someone who has done this before, "Mr. Cross, this is a closed session of the Aldercroft board. Whatever it is you think you need to discuss with us." Fitch stood. He took a document from his folder and walked it to Vivienne and set it in front of her. "The gentleman at the end of the table," Fitch said, "is the registered holder of 44% of Aldercroft Hospitality Voting Common, held through Brightwater Holdings LLC and its affiliated nominee entities, audited and certified as of this morning." Vivienne looked at the document. She read it. Her face did not show shock. Her face showed the expression of a woman who has just understood that a thing she believed was the floor was not the floor. Her right hand on the table was still. Her left hand, just beneath the table edge, was not. The other directors received copies. The room stayed quiet in the way rooms stay quiet when people are recalculating. Bennett spoke for the first time. The board bylaws allow a holder of record with 40% or more of the voting common to call a special resolution without advance notice provided a quorum is present. He had read the bylaws twice on the plane from Portland 5 months ago. "I'm calling that resolution now. The proposed restructuring is withdrawn. Marin Aldercroft retains her title and full executive authority, effective through this sentence. Gerald Fitch is retained as outside counsel under a revised engagement structure. I have no further business before the board today." He set a single signed page on the table. Vivienne stood. She looked at the page. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She picked up her bag from the back of her chair, and she walked out, and the door did not slam behind her because she was the kind of woman who, even in this, would not give anyone the satisfaction of a slammed door. Marin remained seated. Her hands were still flat on the table. She was looking at the far end of the table, at the man who had just walked into this room in a suit she had never seen him wear, and she was doing the work, very fast and very quietly, of understanding everything at once. Bennett stood. He crossed to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at her once, not with an explanation, not with an apology, just with the look of a man who has put something down somewhere it will be taken care of. Then he left her the room. He took the stairs down. He needed the stairs. Thursday evening, Marin parked on Jones Street and sat in her car for 3 minutes before getting out. The porch light was on. The loose board on the bottom step made it sound when she crossed it, and she thought, briefly, that it had not been fixed, and then she thought that maybe it had been left exactly that way. Willa was asleep. Bennett had told her, while making grilled cheese, that someone might stop by later, and Willa had said with the certainty of a 17-year-old who had already formed an opinion, "Miss Marin?" Bennett opened the door before she knocked. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon. He did not say what kind. He set them on the kitchen table and sat across from her and waited. Marin wrapped both hands around her glass, the way you hold something you are not sure you should be holding. She looked at the table. She looked up. Who was Claire to you? He had known the question was coming for 5 months. He had turned it over hundreds of times in those months, finding the version that was true and complete, and not more than she should have to take in at once. He had not found that version. So he gave her the true one. My wife. The kitchen was quiet in the way kitchens are quiet at 10 at night when the city outside is winding down. She grew up in Savannah, he said. She left for school and didn't come back, not to live. But she came back professionally, twice, and the second time was to consult for Aldercroft Hospitality on a property assessment. She spent 4 weeks on the inn. She produced a report. Your mother received the report and declined to implement any of it. He paused. Claire said afterward that there was someone inside that company who already knew everything in the report. She said she had met her for 20 minutes in a hallway and could tell. Marin was still. We married in 2016. Willa was born in 2018. He looked at the glass. Claire was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of 2020. She lived 14 months. He stopped. He started again. She worked through the first year. She wrote a guide to adaptive reuse in historic hospitality properties that a university press in Boston published in the fall of 2021. It is still in print. The cover is dark green. She chose dark green because she said the Aldercroft courtyard was the most alive color she had ever seen in a building that old. Marin made a sound that was not a word. In her last month, Bennett said, she asked me one thing. She did not ask me to fix anything. She did not ask me to take anything. She asked me to make sure the inn was restored correctly, because, she said, it deserved to be what it was meant to be. And she said that by the time it mattered, the person who needed the authority to run it would be ready for it. He looked up. She said your name. Marin cried then, not dramatically. The way a person cries when they have been holding grief in a professional shape for a very long time, and someone has finally handed it back to them in its actual form. She turned her face slightly away and pressed her closed fist briefly against her mouth and let it happen. Bennett looked at the window above the sink, where the fig tree was just visible in the yard light, and he did not try to stop it or redirect it or make it smaller. He let her have all of it. When she looked up, her eyes were red and her face was the face of someone who has just set something down. Why didn't you come to us directly? She said. Why all of this? Because Claire didn't want a confrontation, he said. She wanted a restoration, both kinds. He looked at his hands. And because I needed to know what the building was before I could know what it needed. Marin looked at him for a long time. She was right, she said finally. Quietly, about the courtyard. I go there because it's the only part of the property that was never managed to death. She said that, Bennett said. Almost exactly. Marin picked up her bourbon. She drank. He drank. Outside on Jones Street, someone walked past on the brick sidewalk, and the fig tree moved once in the night air, and the loose board on the porch step made its small sound in the wind, and Savannah went on the way it always did, unhurried, unbothered, keeping its own time. 4 weeks later, the Aldercroft Inn restoration entered its final phase. Marin's first full month as sole executive had been the kind of month that happens when the right person is finally allowed to do the right thing, direct, efficient, clear. The Douglas Aldercroft vendor relationship was unwound through a process that was quiet and final. Vivian was in her house on Gaston Street, with 2 attorneys, and was not by any account at peace with the situation, but she was also not in the building. On the Saturday before Thanksgiving, Marin drove to the inn in jeans and came in through the courtyard gate. The crew was down to its last handful of workers. Bennett was on the second-floor balcony, with a can of teak oil and a rag, working on the original pine railing that had been uncovered beneath 3 layers of paint. Willa saw Marin first from the courtyard below. She ran across the brick with a folded piece of paper held in both hands. She stopped 2 feet in front of Marin and held it up. Marin took it. She unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, colored pencil on the back of a piece of site plan paper. 3 figures standing in a courtyard beneath what was clearly the Aldercroft's rosemary wall, rendered in enthusiastic green. 1 figure was tall, in dark clothes. 1 was medium height, in a blue dress. 1 was small with a braid. Above the wall, rendered in careful detail, was a string of small globe lights that the crew had installed along the roofline. Marin knelt down on the brick, eye level with Willa, and folded the drawing back along its crease the way you fold something you intend to keep. She put it in the front pocket of her shirt, against her chest. Willa nodded once, fully satisfied, and went off to investigate a beetle near the rosemary. On the balcony above, Bennett had put down the rag some time ago. The weekend before the inn's reopening in December, he and Marin sat in the courtyard in the early evening, side by side on the low brick wall, after the last of the crew had packed up and the gate had been closed from the inside. The night was cold enough for jackets. The sconce above the back door gave them enough light. Her hand rested on the brick wall beside her. His hand rested on the brick wall beside him. Not touching. Not the distance of strangers either. After a long while, she said, "The reopening ceremony is the 14th. I want to dedicate the courtyard." He turned his head. "I was thinking," she said, "of naming it for the person who saw what it was supposed to be before anyone else did." He looked down at the brick between their hands. Something in the corner of his mouth moved, very slightly, in the way of a person keeping something in. "She would have been embarrassed," he said, "and she would have loved it." Marin nodded. The rosemary along the south wall held its shape in the cold, dark, and certain and unbothered by the season, the way things hold their shape when they have put their roots in deep enough and been left alone long enough to become exactly what they are. The 14th of December was cold and clear, the sky above Savannah a particular shade of winter blue that does not exist in other seasons. The courtyard had been strung with small globe lights. 40 people stood on the brick in coats and scarves. There was warm cider. The restoration crew came, most of them which Marin had not expected and which meant more than she said. A small bronze plaque had been set into the south wall, low near the base of the rosemary. The Claire Ashworth Cross courtyard. Marin spoke for 5 minutes without notes. She did not talk about the restoration budget. She did not talk about her title, or the board, or the things that had changed since September. She talked about a woman who had spent 4 weeks in this building and had produced a report that told the truth about it, and who had nevertheless believed it was worth saving. She talked about what it means to love a place you can not stay in. She talked about a book with a dark green cover. She said the name 3 times. Claire, Claire, Claire. Then she stepped back, and the 40 people in the courtyard applauded, not the applause of obligation but the quiet kind that means something. Bennett stood at the back with Willa on his shoulders. Willa wore a red knit hat with a pompon. Her mittened hands held the sides of his head. She watched Marin the whole time, with the complete and uncomplicated attention of a child who has already decided how she feels about a person. When the crowd thinned, Marin came to them. Willa leaned down and held out one mitten. Marin took it. The 3 of them stood near the south wall while the globe lights swayed in the cold. Willa looked at the plaque, then at Marin, then at her father, performing a quick internal calculation. After a moment, Marin said quietly, "Don't go back to Portland." Bennett looked at her. "Willa has an opinion on the local school district," Marin said. "I asked her." From above, Willa said, "It has an art room." Bennett looked at Marin for a long time. The courtyard lights moved, the rosemary held still. "We weren't planning to," he said. Willa grinned the way 7-year-olds grin when adults finally catch up. The 3 of them walked together toward the gate. Behind them, the plaque caught the last of the light from the globe string. The gate closed with a small iron sound. Outside, Savannah's old streets went on in every direction, patient and unhurried, the way a city goes on when it has been standing long enough to know that the people who love it best are always the ones who stayed.